In this video, you're going to get your app deployed live to the web, and by the end, you will have a shareable URL. You can give it to anybody with an internet connection, and they will be able to view and run your Expensify app. Now, the tool that we're going to use to actually deploy is called Heroku. Heroku is an application deployment platform similar to AWS Beanstalk or DigitalOcean. The reason I love using Heroku is because it's very easy to set up. It doesn't require you to be an IT specialist or a server admin in order to get your apps up and running. I use Heroku for my personal projects and for all client projects. That's Heroku.com, and they also have a great free tier, so we can actually get started and host applications without even providing credit card information. Now, at this point, we just need to sign up or log in. I have an existing account, so I am going to go ahead and log in. If you have an existing one, you can log in too. Otherwise, you are going to need to sign up, and we'll just reconvene once we're all in the dashboard page. So right now, I am going to assume that you are logged in to your account. Now, what you see here is going to be very different from what I see. I do have applications. You're probably seeing some sort of walkthrough to get started. We don't have to worry about any of that. We're going to handle all of this on our own. So we can actually just go ahead and close down the Heroku web app. Almost all of the work that we're going to be doing related to Heroku is going to be from the command line. So when we create applications, when we customize them, when we push our code changes up to them, all of that happens via the Heroku CLI. So the next thing I do want to do is actually install that tool. That's going to be our main interface to Heroku. We can find that by Googling Heroku CLI, and there is an easy to use installer for Windows and Mac, and there's a single command you can run for Linux. Down below, we have our Mac installer, we have our Windows installer, and we have our Linux Ubuntu command to run. There are also other ways you can get it installed. I recommend going with one of the easier ones though. I am going to go through the process for the Mac OS installer. So it's just one of those click next installers. All we have to do is move through it with the default values. There is no need to add any customization at this point. We're going to go through the process, authenticating until we get to the end, and once it's done, all we need to do is actually run some commands from the terminal. Now, depending on your operating system, you might need to restart your machine or restart all of your terminal instances in order to access this command. What we're looking for, though, is the ability to run Heroku space -- version. This command is going to print out the version you have installed. If you do have one installed, if you don't have anything installed, it is going to print out an error message. At this point, you can see it's doing a little bit of updating behind the scenes before it actually goes ahead and does anything. And there we go. We have our version, the Heroku CLI 6.13.13. Now, the version you use doesn't really matter. We're going to be using commands that are available in all of the versions, and it's super stable. So just go ahead and install the latest version of the Heroku command line interface. There is no need to worry about specific versioning. From here, we now have the ability to do a lot of really cool things, create applications and deploy apps, but we do have to authenticate with Heroku so they know what account we are associated with. To get that done, we need to run a single command from the command line. This is Heroku login. Now, if you're on Linux or OS X, you can go ahead and run this from the regular terminal. If you're on Windows, you actually have to run this from the command prompt. It is not going to work for Git Bash. It's currently not supported. So we're going to go ahead and run this one, and all we have to do is provide our email and our password. I'm going to toss the email in, and then the password. And once we do get to the end, we should get a message along the lines of logged in as some user, where your email shows up there. If you are seeing that, then we are all authenticated, and we actually have the ability to create our first Heroku app. We get that done using the Heroku create command. Now, this is a command that's only going to work once you are authenticated, but since we can actually run it. Now, we can run it with no arguments, in which case it is going to randomly generate a name for us, an application name, but I like to provide my own so it's a little easier to figure out exactly what app I'm referring to. So right here, I'm going to explicitly provide a name. I'm going to use React-course-2-Expensify. Awesome. Now that I have the name in place, we can go ahead and run this command. And this isn't going to do anything specific with our code. This does two things. First up, behind the scenes, Heroku is setting up your new application. And second up, it's actually adding a new Git remote to your local repository. So if we run Git remote, we can see we have Origin, which we added, and we also have Heroku, which we never manually added. This was added for us when we ran Heroku create. And if I run git remote with the veep flag to get the verbose output, we can take a look at exactly what we have. Right here, we have the URL to our Git repository on the Heroku servers. Now, why do we have a new Git remote? Well, this is how we're going to deploy. We are going to push our code up to the Heroku remote. Heroku is going to get that code, and it is going to deploy the application with the latest. So if we want to actually get our app up and running, all we really need to do is make a commit for the latest changes and push it up to that remote. Now, we can't do this just yet. There are a few changes we need to make, but once we do make those few changes specifically for Heroku, we will be able to actually commit and push to the Heroku remote. Now, what changes do we need to make? Well, first up, we have to make a few tweaks to our application in terms of how Heroku is supposed to know what to do. So right now, Heroku is not going to know how to start up our app. We have to teach it how to do that. And the first thing we're going to teach it how to do is how to actually run the node server. Now, when Heroku starts up your application, it is going to try to run the start script in package.json. If we go to package.json, we don't actually have a start script, so it's not going to know to look in server and run server.js through node. We have to explicitly say to do that by, over here, adding the start script. Start. And we are going to provide the exact command we ran from the command line. We're going to run node space. We're going to go into the server directory. In there, we are going to run server.js. So with this in place, Heroku is at least going to run the correct file, but there is a change we have to make to that file as well. Currently, we are listening on a static port 3000. Now, this is okay for our local machine. If port 3000 is taken for some reason or not available, I can just manually switch this over. But this system is not going to work on Heroku. Heroku is actually going to provide a dynamic value to your application, which means that it's not a static value you can type in. Instead, Heroku provides you with an environment variable. This environment variable is going to change every single time you deploy your app. While it can change, it might not change. But regardless, it's not something we can statically type inside of our code. Instead, we have to read off of something right here. We are going to create a variable, const port. We are going to get its value from process.env and the environment variable that Heroku automatically sets for you is uppercase port. If this variable exists, that means we are on Heroku and we do want to use the port value. If it doesn't exist, we can default to something like 3000 on our local machine. We can get that done right here using the logical OR operator. So I use port if it exists. If not, let's go ahead and use 3000. Now that we have the port variable created, all we really need to do is use it right here instead of the static 3000, and now we're good to go. Our server is completely compatible with Heroku. Heroku knows how to start it, and once it is started, the server knows how to actually listen on the port Heroku is expecting. There is one more thing we need to do before we can actually commit and push up to the Heroku remote. We need to teach Heroku how to run Webpack. So when we first created our node modules folder, we added it to git ignore. So this isn't committed into our repository, and that's good because this is a generated folder. We can always regenerate all of the dependencies by running yarn install. It's going to go through package.json and the yarn lock file. It is going to grab all the dependency versions and it's going to get all of those set up. Well, the same thing is actually true with the bundle map file, styles, and the styles map file. These are just generated files. They're generated when we run Webpack, and we don't actually want to commit them to the project. Imagine if I ran Webpack in production mode, and then I ran Webpack in development mode locally to test things out. We would have different changes to our source code, and that's not something that's ideal. We're going to leave off all of those files from the Git repository. Now, to work around that, we need to make sure Heroku does run Webpack. Otherwise, it's going to try to start the server up, and none of those assets are going to exist. Now, this process is actually pretty easy. There are a couple of custom scripts that Heroku is going to look for and run as your application starts up. There are two right here We can set up a script. The one that we're going to be using is Heroku-post build. This is going to run after Heroku installs all of your dependencies, and this is a great place to run some commands to build. So if you're using Grunt or Gulp, you would put those here. If we're using Webpack, we would put that here as well. Now we have post build. There is also pre-build, which we're not going to take advantage of. Pre-build runs before your dependencies get installed. You can use this, but I personally don't find it particularly useful, but I do want to make you aware that it does exist. We're going to be using post build, and what do we want to do? All we want to do is run the build prod command. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to type in right here what we would use from the terminal. Yarn run. We are going to run build :prod, and there we have it. Now, the actual Webpack production build is going to run on the Heroku servers, and this is exactly what we want. From here, all we need to do is add to git ignore those 4 files. So I'm going to add all 4. Public / we have bundle.js. Then I can duplicate that line a few times. The next one would be bundle.js.map. Down here, we have styles.css, and down below we have styles.css.map. Now we are all ready. We can actually make the commit. We can push our changes to Heroku, and hopefully, if everything went well, we can actually view the Expensify app live on the web. I'm going to go ahead and start this process off by making sure all the files are saved, and from the terminal, I will clear things and run git status to get an overview of exactly what's changed. Right here, we have a few things. We have 3 modified files, and we have our new server.js file in the server directory. We want to make sure all of these get up. Otherwise, Heroku is not going to have the latest code, and it's not going to be able to run our application as expected. So what are we going to do? All we're going to do is run git add to add all of them, and git commit to make a commit. We are going to provide our message right here in double quotes. Setup, production, build, and server. Excellent. Now that we have the commit in place, we can clear the output, and we're going to do 2 things. First up, we're going to push to GitHub. That would be git push. There is no need to specify the remote or the master branch since we have the origin remote set up. That's the default right here. I can run this command, and that's going to make sure the latest code gets up on GitHub, which is something we always want to do. Now, the next thing we're going to do is explicitly take our branch master and push it up to that Heroku remote. When we do this, Heroku is going to detect that. It is then going to go through the process of deploying our application. We can get that done using git push Heroku, that's the remote name, master. Now, when we run this command, it is going to take a little while. It is going to be installing our dependencies, it's going to be running Webpack and starting up our server. The good news is that it's really only the first time that's super slow. Later on, it's going to be able to cache a lot of these assets, so it won't have to do things like reinstall every single dependency. But for that first one, it is indeed going to take quite some time. Now we can see some various things happening up above. We can see we are resolving node versions, it's detecting that we are using Yarn, and it's doing those things by looking at our application structure. So right here, it sees we have a package.json file and a yarn lock file. It uses the package.json file to determine that we are using node and npm. Then it uses the yarn.lock file to determine that we're actually using Yarn as opposed to using the npm command line directly. Now it's going through the process of actually installing all of our dependencies. You can see right here some output we're used to seeing when we run yarn commands from our local machine. Down below, we are using yarn run build :prod to run the production build. This is actually going to be running Webpack. It is going to be generating all of those assets. Right here, we can see the output from Webpack, and that's pretty much the end of the process. Now we have the deployed application. When people do see this output, they usually freak out right here when they see that the final application size is 35 megabytes. It's important to note that this is not the size served up to the user in the browser. This is the size of the entire little Heroku instance that's starting up. So it contains a lot of stuff, a lot of code we did not write, a lot of code that's never served up to the user. It's just for the back-end process of starting up the Heroku app. Now at this point, we can actually view our application in the browser. It spit out a URL right here. Essentially, it is your Heroku app name followed by .herokuapp.com. You can copy and paste this manually, but you can also run the Heroku open command And when we run this, it's actually going to crack open that URL in your browser. So right here, you can see it automatically brought me over to my app URL. And what do I get? I have my live Expensify application. I have all of my assets getting set up and served up correctly because we are seeing the final application. If I switch over to Create Expense, that page shows up. If I refresh things, it is correctly serving up index.html. So everything that we just set up has been proven to work because we are seeing the app live on the web. Now, there is a chance things did not go correctly. You might be seeing a page like application error with the Heroku logo. If you are seeing that, it probably means there was just a 1 or 2 character typo somewhere along the way and things just aren't working correctly. So for example, if the start script or this script isn't spelled exactly right, Heroku isn't going to know to actually run it. Now, when we do have problems with our applications, there is a command we can run from the terminal to actually view these server logs. If I clear the output and run Heroku logs, this is going to dump the Heroku server logs. Now, in my case, it's just showing me a lot of server logs related to pages the user requested. Here we have all of the assets being loaded from the browser. But if things did go poorly, you are going to see a really long stack trace. Now, I don't have one of those stack traces here, but it's one of the stack traces you would see if you had an error in your JavaScript. It's going to show a whole bunch of files and line numbers. If you are getting something like that and your app didn't deploy successfully, just go ahead and crack open a new question in the Q&A. Include a zip of your project, include the Heroku logs output, and we'll get you unstuck and back on track in no time. For now, though, that is it for this video. To recap, what we did is we told Heroku how to run the server and we told Heroku how to run Webpack. Getting all of that done allowed us to actually deploy to the web. We're going to continue focusing on our Heroku build and focusing on that new feature workflow throughout the rest of the section. So let's go ahead and jump over to the next one.